Hey everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
Welcome back to another hot-ish take about a childhood sexual abuse scandal.
Guys, all we do is bring joy into your lives. It's
We're
literally our job.
we're givers. Those of you that are subscribers or follow our videos know that we have spent a lot of time actually talking about the intersection of institutions and abuse. We've looked at the Catholic Church and the show Keepers. We've looked at extensively the USA Gymnastics abuse scandal. And we came across a couple articles this week in the news about relating to a growing, horrifying abuse scandal with the Boy Scouts of America and Scouts Canada, which is the Canadian parallel. But the articles were about specifically the Boy Scouts of America, where we are now up to 95,000 claims of sexual and physical abuse against people who were volunteers or employees of the Boy Scouts of America. And Dr. Kristen's going to get into the legality of that a bit. We wanted to talk about it for a couple of reasons. One, not a lot of people are talking about it. We have 3 documentaries on the USA Gymnastics scandal to date. The first complaints against the Boy Scouts of America date to 1935. And we, as of yet, do not have a Netflix-style documentary about this situation. So we wanted to bring attention to it. We wanted to talk specifically about why we don't talk about abuse and young boys culturally as a society, because that's a huge part of why this story isn't being, blasted at us at the same level. What Larry Nassar did was disgusting and horrible, and there were over 500 girls whose lives were forever changed. 500 is not 95,000, and they are not getting anywhere near comparable coverage, much less disproportionate. So we wanted to have a hottish take about it, because that's what we do. Dr. Kristen, explain to me what's going on with the Boy Scouts and why all of a sudden we have so many of these accusations appearing now.
Now, I would be delighted to.
Thank
So the impetus of all of this was that in February, the Boy Scouts of America as an organization filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, this is one of those things that we toss around a lot in the universe, but in the last couple of years, as I have lived in business land, I've realized that most lay people actually have no idea what Chapter 11 means, because we assume it means that the company goes away. And that's actually not what it means. So Chapter 11 is filed for any number of reasons. There's actually a couple different kinds of bankruptcy that you can file within Chapter 11, especially if you're a corporation. Because just a reminder, we in the United States treat corporations as individuals. So a corporation has something filed as a corporation has the same legal rights as you as an individual. So, which we could actually, there's a really fascinating documentary about that, and we should probably cover that now that I'm talking about that.
Yeah, let's do that. Put a pin in that. We'll be back.
We'll be back. It's literally called The Corporation. It came out in the early 90s, early aughts, sorry. And I watched it in grad school, and it boggled my mind.
Yeah, let's do it.
So but Chapter 11 is really about getting your books in order. That's it. It's about everything's kind of spiraling out of control. You don't have enough cash on hand to pay all your debts. You don't really understand the valuation of your assets. And if we could drain some assets to then get some cash to pay your debtors, it's a lot about cash management. Another little note, most businesses and most families, most families that are labeled as millionaires don't actually just have $1 million in cash lying around. They have assets that are valued at certain values. So the amount of money that our parent company is evaluated at is not the amount of money that our parent company has cash in the bank account. It is the amount of money that the market says our buildings are worth, our assets are worth. Assets can be everything from intellectual property to the physical things in your building. So the Boy Scouts assets could be mostly their camps, to be really honest. For anyone who wasn't kind of in this world, Boy Scout camps are also rented out to other organizations. Girl Scout camps are the same way. Salvation Army camps are the same way. It's a way they make money, is to rent out these outdoor spaces to other people. So
and presumably all that kind of stuff. They have some buildings that they own, like headquarter buildings, maybe.
Oh, headquarter buildings.
That would
and then
be
probably assets. Also some intellectual property and copyright stuff they have on badges and things like that. But I would guess the majority of their assets, and just from the little bit of digging I've done, the majority of their assets are their camps.
Right.
Now, a bunch of years ago, I want to say 5, but I could be wrong, the Mormon Church separated itself from the Boy Scouts of America. And that was a 20% membership drop overnight. So we combine that with then a whole lot of families are super busy and scouting isn't really popular and all this kind of stuff. And then we combine it with the pandemic. And I don't think anyone was surprised the Boy Scouts of America filed for Chapter 11 in February, even. Like, as the pandemic was starting, I think they saw the writing on the wall and they filed.
Yeah, I think in the New York Times article, they said the peak population of membership was like 1978, and it's gone down.
That sounds about right. Yep.
Yeah, it's gone down since then, and was still, I think, around 2 million, but pre-pandemic, I think.
Pre-pandemic. So it's dropped off precipitously, obviously. I mean, and they've been having fights with the Girl Scouts over, they tried to let girls in to
I remember.
Boost their numbers, and the Girl Scouts were like, hi, we've got a whole thing like
hi,
over here.
Thanks.
And then I was a Girl Scout, by the way, and I still quite like the Girl Scout organization as a nonprofit that like I encourage people to volunteer for in their area. And my father was a Boy Scout. My brother was a Cub Scout. Like, we are a family that is amenable to this kind of civic organization. But part of bankruptcy filing is that you have to understand, meaning the court. So the court has to understand the total potential liabilities that the company has against it, the organization has against it. So they've got to understand. So like if a company goes into bankruptcy, for instance, one of the things that a court is going to do is contact every single one of their customers and say, hey, by the way, you may not know this, and you may not be telling them, we may not have a record, but if they've got outstanding debts against you, we need to know. Can you file how much money they owe us? So between that, they filed for bankruptcy in the state of Delaware and the state of New York. So the New York State also, at the same time as this was happening over the last couple of years, has lifted its regulations on the statute of limitations to report sexual abuse.
I think for 1 year, they like opened it for 1 year.
Yeah.
So we're within that year period where like you have to file a claim that would be normally outside the statute of limitations. You have 1 year to do so. So that has escalated the claim filing. The claims.
The District of Columbia has done a very similar thing. The state of Ohio did a similar thing. There's been like things happening. Yeah. So all like a perfect storm for the Boy Scouts and for disclosure is that over the summer, we went from around 12,000 reported cases of abuse in the Boy Scouts of America from 1945 to 2016, which is terrible, but unfortunately is not a number that's going to raise any flags for a whole lot of reasons. But hopefully the number that is going to raise flags is that we are now up to 95,000. Last week we were at like 85. So like these things are still coming.
Honestly, like the New York Times article, I think was 86,000.
Yeah. And this morning the WAPO has 95,000.
So like it's going up. And one of the, there's obviously several groups of claimants who are like, joining their legal, cases together. And there's the lawyer for a group of 50 of them, said, these numbers are horrifying. This number is really, really high. This is not by any stretch all of them.
No.
Like this number is actually much bigger.
Yeah. And the Boy Scouts of America have known that they had deviants, and that's the word they use legitimately, deviants in their group since 1935. They started keeping a list.
Yes, it's called the perversion list.
The perversion list.
Is what they called it.
So they've known for a long time.
A long time.
And they've known. My memory of the Catholic Church record-keeping abuse scandal, for my memory, they didn't start keeping the records till after Vatican II. So technically, I could be wrong. I mean, they knew about it, but I don't think they started keeping records till after Vatican II.
I think so, yeah. And like, it was really like they have a lot of evidence of priests being moved around in the 40s and 50s, but like it was the 60s where I think they were like note taking that they
Yeah,
were.
because that's when they started building like the rehabilitation things, I think was after Vatican II.
I think so. It's been a while since we've seen the keepers, but I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that's right. So it is either parallel to or before the record keeping of the Catholic Church. For sure. And this won't hit a lot of people as emotionally as it did the Catholic Church. It won't hit people as emotionally as some of the assault scandals, specifically at USA Gymnastics and some other places. And this is where I'd like to pause and talk really briefly about our perceptions of young girls and our perceptions of young boys within Western society. So young girls are seen generally as a culture as things that need protection, because we are often seen as things, as creatures that need protection, as creatures that are innately pure.
Mm-hmm.
This is why you get so much hand wringing over teenage pregnancy, actually. One of the reasons, there are very legitimate reasons to hand wring over teenage pregnancy. Children should not have children. But the amount of moral judgment that comes with that is entirely based on this kind of thing. So we have a real belief.
Acceptable teenage pregnancy was the Immaculate Conception.
Immaculate Conception. Girl, as far as we can tell, was 13 years old. God bless her hips. So, and that has evolved. I mean, children were having.
Anyway,
there's so many rabbit trails I can fall down here. Adolescence didn't exist until the 20th century, and it didn't exist anywhere. Like the United States created adolescence after World War II. So, as a developmental, cultural thing,
like period of your life. Yeah.
This is one of the hills I will die on. There's not a word called teenager back in the 1800s. It just didn't happen.
Welcome to Dr. Kristen's soapbox.
This drives me nuts, guys. Anyway, so we have a real thing for keeping girls pure.
Safe. Yeah.
And safe and pure. And one of those reasons is that we kind of see them as the people, like we know eventually their wombs will be in a certain way, the things that bring the next generation. Mm-hmm. So we have to keep them safe. We do not have the same preoccupation with young boys. We also tend to we have historically viewed things that we now understand as abuse as character building in young boys, things that toughen them up. Anything that upsets them, they're a crybaby. We have a real different cultural relationship with the abuse of young boys. And I think that is particularly true in this case, since the Boy Scouts of America were so seen as a character building entity.
Yeah.
We have not had a lot of personal stories come out of this bankruptcy court. We haven't had a lot of tales, but it would not surprise me if when we start to do qualitative analysis on some of the claims, you find that they didn't report at all at an even higher rate than girls don't. Or if they did hint, they were told to not be a crybaby.
Yeah, and I want to bring into just on top of this, how we genderize young people.
Yeah.
And the expectations, and this is going along with a lot of what you've already said, but I wanted to pull that out a little bit more. And the way we tell boys how to be boys and what is acceptable behavior for boys and what is unacceptable, and how that plays into all of this creation of a very vulnerable population. And so, we talk a lot about how predators in this way, like Larry Nassar, see an opportunity in these institutions where they can prey on this vulnerable population. And young girls are vulnerable too for different reasons, which we just talked about. But young boys in this instance, especially because of the way we are very strict at telling them what is the appropriate behavior and what is the inappropriate behavior. And how that can be manipulated in this sense. And also, I'd like you to talk specifically about, I don't know where the next point you were taking, but I want to put my request in for you to explain why we also have a difficult time talking about male sex and abuse and our perception that sexual attraction to someone of the same sex, particularly within men, is an equivalent to abuse. Not that it is, but like a lot of times we would say, oh, well, they're just, they're gay.
Yeah, we did the equivalency thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we called same-sex attraction a mental illness for a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the words that we had, buggery, sodomy, and like the biblical origins of that, like, right? Like, so I want you specifically, because you know more about that, to explain it as well, because that's a huge piece of this. And masculinity, what masculinity is, what heteronormative masculinity is, and how abuse is a part of that.
Right. So there's a lot of rabbit trails I can trace in all of this. But let's just make a real blanket statement that I myself can poke holes in as it's coming out of my mouth. But for the purposes of this video, let me just say, our cultural understanding of sex is that it is for procreation.
Yeah.
And so any sexual behavior that is not missionary style, penis into vagina during a fertile time of a woman's life, in order for it to be procreate to result in procreation, to varying degrees, Western and particularly American, let me just focus on American society is uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the reasons we are uncomfortable with the idea of a female orgasm, because an orgasm isn't necessary for procreation. We are uncomfortable talking about infertility because it is a barrier to procreation. We are uncomfortable talking about periods because it means that procreation has not happened. Everything is about procreation. So obviously male sex cannot lead to procreation. And because the entire human endeavor, especially before the advent of the birth control pill, was based on as much procreation as possible, because we hadn't figured out how to keep babies alive very easily. And there was a numbers game involved. You needed a lot of kids to be able to, do this kind of thing. There was an even greater misunderstanding of sex for pleasure, and a greater assumption that same-sex attraction must literally mean something is broken in your brain. Like I said, until the 1970s, the American Psychological Association classified homosexuality as a mental disorder. And that is recent memory, in case
you didn't know, we didn't get birth control for non-married women until 1972. Yep. So it's a short time we've been able to
real short time in which we've done this. Yeah. Now, at the same time, we have a real kind of difficult understanding between the subsect of child abuse that is pedophilia. And what I'm going to say is controversial. Please don't at me. But in one of the disciplines that I inhabit, what I have been taught, and what makes sense in my brain, is that pedophilia also includes sexual attraction. Abuse does not necessarily. Abuse is about power and any number of other things. I do believe that any action a pedophiliac takes to work out those sexual desires is abuse. Mm-hmm. But I have yet to find any academic or empirical evidence that all child abusers are pedophiles.
Yeah.
If it exists like that, I do want to see. I just haven't seen it, because there is a lot of reasons that people abuse children. This is terrible, but there is now. In places like the Catholic Church, Larry Nassar was a pedophile. Let's just call that out there. In places like the Catholic Church and the Boy Scouts of America, do I believe the highest proportion of them are pedophiles? Yes, I do. But that is entirely just based on my gut instinct and assumptions, because the power dynamic is already inherently there. I've read several scholars that believe that child abuse without pedophilia is much more common within family structures than it is extra family structures. So there's a lot of mess in this for sure. Yeah. And one of the things with the Boy Scouts is they use a lot of like tribal language, because the Girl Scouts don't as much. I'll say this, but let me just rabbit trail. If somebody came out tomorrow and said there's a sexual abuse scandal in Girl Scouts of America, I will be slightly more surprised, because it was women on women, and we just don't see that as much. Not because I don't believe that there can't be predators in the Girl Scouts. It's just not statistically as likely. Yeah. To be a wide-scale abuse problem. Whereas I will tell you that nothing I have read in the last 10 days about the Boy Scouts of America has surprised me.
Not at all. Nothing.
and there's lots of conversations to be had about toxic masculinity and a lot of conversations to be had about that. But this kind of understanding and confusion around sex, we are also just really don't like to talk about sex that isn't procreative. It creeps us out. It like all this kind of stuff. Like I remember in the first season of Downton Abbey, when Mr. Pamuk died while having sexual relations with Lady Mary. Anyone who's a student of history knew that they were having anal sex, because that is what upper-bred women did then to not get pregnant with, or they were having oral sex, but they were not having penetrative penis and vagina sex. They were not. And so most students of history were like, well, that's hilarious. Like, like, this is ridiculous. And a lot of people, you could tell by comments on YouTube videos and Twitter and like analysis of the episode, that had literally never occurred to them.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, like we have like I'm not making this up. We have diaries of people in Lady Mary's exact position that describe their sexual secrets in great detail about how not to get pregnant.
Yeah.
And that is one of the more popular options. But because we don't talk about sex, especially in Western society post Queen Victoria, thanks Vicky, we were much more liberal about talking about sex. You want to read some real randy stuff, by the way, please read Alexander Hamilton's letters.
Yes.
That boy was randy.
All the time.
All the time. God love him. He would not have survived Victorian America. He would have just like actually spun himself into like a grave. He couldn't have done it. God love him. Even before he cheated on his wife, he was who?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, but all of this, I know right now, we are making people uncomfortable having this conversation, and that saddens me, because unless we have these kind of conversations and get used to saying these kind of words, it is more likely that abuse will flourish. Yeah. Because we don't talk to our children about sex early enough, because we just assume there can only be one sex talk and we have to tell them everything at once, where instead you should be doing developmentally appropriate things about people's bodies and where you can be touched and where you can't be touched. And parents are so much better about that now than they were in our generation.
Yeah.
But when you talk to our generation, we're older millennials, it was very rare to have a parent who was body forward and having those honest conversations with you in a way. Yeah. That's happening much more now with millennial parents than it happened with boomer parents for a number of very valid reasons. This is not a judgment zone. This is just a recognizing that we need to evolve. Yeah.
And I think the perfect segue from that explanation, which was so thorough and, very interesting.
Sorry.
No. It was very good. That wasn't.
Sorry to everybody that I just rambled for like 20 minutes about male sex. Apologies.
I wanted you to do that because it's so important to say it. But I think we've seen this evidenced in a lot of the stuff we've watched, both professionally for Abbey Research and offline. Leaving Neverland.
Yep.
The documentary about specifically the two young men who accused Michael Jackson of abuse, talk a lot about how when they were kids, they didn't know what was appropriate. They were being told they were being loved. And it's all because we don't have these conversations. And we, in our attempt to, in our shock really at reading this New York Times article on Monday, we've spent the last few days trying to find more people talking about what's going on in the Boy Scouts. We found there is a Sundance Film Festival documentary called The Church and the Fourth Estate, specifically about the relationship between the Mormon Church and abuse, and I believe Idaho Boy Scouts
and the Boy Scouts of America. Yeah, like that.
Yeah. It was specifically within the state of Idaho, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
And we also found on the YouTubes a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Fifth Estate, which is apparently like their Dateline.
Their Dateline?
I don't know. Canadians out there, correct us. Called Scouts Honor. We found a documentary, Scouts Honor, Sexual Abuse in the Boy Scouts, that talks a lot about a lot of these issues. So we'll make sure and include the link below to that so you can watch it. It's like 46 minutes. Absolutely none of it surprised us. A lot of it had to do with, particularly because they deal with the same person who abused boys in both Canada and the United States, like the lack of coordination between record keeping in the Boy Scouts of America and Scouts Canada. But what I wanted to bring up was the way that the men now who were young boys at the time talked about the abuse,
Mm-hmm.
and how they didn't talk to anyone about it.
Mm-hmm.
Know how to. They didn't feel like they could. They were ashamed.
Or they were told this was normal. Every man has a special friend like this.
Yes,
Every man does this. This is part of manhood. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what, to bring us back to where we started from, right? Like the things we tell children about what is appropriate to be a man or to be a woman can have really damaging ramifications in a lot of ways that don't impact your physical safety, but in some ways that do. Mm-hmm. And yes, this one particular abuser told his victims, oh, every young boy has a special friend. Like, this is what happens. It's totally normal. And because we don't have these developmentally appropriate conversations, these kids are left in this vulnerable position. And it left in a position in which predators can take advantage of them. And that's one of the reasons I know why Dr. Kristen and I both feel very strongly about talking about this as much as possible. Similarly to how we feel like talking about menstruation as much as possible is important, because we have to break down the barriers around these conversations. We have to address the stigmas and the way that our culture tells us we can and can't talk about things, because literally people's physical safety is at risk. Emotional safety, psychological trauma that these, and like the Scouts Honor documentary, it's in every documentary about abuse, but the trauma that these now adult men go through every day because of what they experienced when they were 7, when they were 11.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the one man's name, who is just filled with anger and pain and like hasn't been able to function as an adult. So like, what are our choices? We are made uncomfortable by having conversations about sex, or we let this happen to young persons, boys, girls, non-binary folks, whatever. And we keep perpetuating this generational trauma because it keeps happening. And especially when we get to institutions like the Catholic Church or the Boy Scouts of America.
Or the Southern Baptist Church, or any number of universities that we could name. Or so just for anyone thinking we're just coming for these two, like.
No, any institution. And we've made that point in a lot of our hottish takes, right? It is the nature of an institution to protect
itself.
And that is also creates an environment in which predators can take advantage of vulnerable people.
Yeah. And for anyone curious if this is a United States thing, sometime in the near future, I'm sure we will talk about Kincora Boys Home in Northern Ireland, which is a continual legal matter, but something that we feel very strongly about is the institutionalized homes in Ireland and Northern Ireland and in the UK. So if you would like us to continue to talk about child abuse, you just let us know. Good news, bad news, no shortage of information there. And we are happy to analyze it for you in part of a bigger cultural conversation to help us kind of figure out how to not make it happen again, not let it happen again.
Yeah.
But that's all I've got to say for now on this. Mm-hmm. I will also say that when I started to look for books on the Boy Scout sexual abuse, the only one I could find was published in 1995 and is out of print. Mm-hmm. So it's just another of like, why aren't we talking about this? Well, because boys. And I have a younger brother, and who was in the Boy Scouts, and even if I didn't, I would like us to be talking about this louder.
Yeah, my brother was in the Boy Scouts for a time. I was in the Brownies and the Girl Scouts. And that was my thought, like watching this documentary talking about abuse in the Boy Scouts of America in the late 70s and the early 80s, I thought about my brother. And what if that had happened to him? Mm-hmm. And what his life would look like, and what our life, the people who love him, what our lives would look like. And, we can make a lot of moral arguments, and we just have, for why we need to keep talking about this, but we are both personally motivated by it as well. So we'll keep our eye out for if a documentary crops up, if we get find access to this church in the fourth state one, you can better believe we will be watching it and talking about it. But we'll make sure to include the links below. So if you want to, you can follow along.
And until next time, when we cover something I'm sure equally as uplifting, we are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Take care, everybody.